Welcome, guys. All right, let's get into this. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to talk about those clips because they're fresh in our mind. And let's start with the first one. You know, we're in this kind of classical music, kind of operatic setting. What was the discussions like? Did you always know there was going to be this kind of theatrical moment? And how was the recording process like for that?
So this was pretty fascinating because this is one of the few instances where we're actually composing the music back when we basically just had scripts. And it was, you know, there's like 3 pages of dialogue that we didn't hear there. And then at the end, it's just like, you know, Jace, that the main character he walks around and shakes hands with a bunch of people. And when you see that sentence in the script, you're like, okay, that might be like, I don't know, 10 seconds or so. And then Christian, the showrunner, is like, no, let's have this be like a really big sort of epic kind of payoff to this whole moment where the orchestra has been crescendoing to this moment. And then we have a lengthy montage, you know, as the piece reaches its coda, as we see him going around sort of wheeling and dealing with everyone else there. So what was fascinating about this is when he told me this, I was like, okay, I'm going to then write a piece of music that really focuses on, you know, a really showy climax and stuff like that. So I wrote an entire piece. We actually recorded it with Ray, the violinist, and then we gave it to Fortiche, the studio, to try to, you know, integrate into the animatic as they were working on it. And so we saw from my first piece, it's like, oh, this doesn't fit the scene at all. It's like I had focused way too hard on the sort of, you know, really flashy virtuoso aspect and didn't write nearly enough of the beginning thing. So it was sort of like because we had written that first piece and then Fortiche was able to edit to it, that was kind of what allowed me to say like, okay, now I get what they're trying to do with the edit. Now I get the scene. Now let me go back and actually start from scratch and write a piece of music that really fits the scene. So being able to have this kind of back and forth where we created a piece of music, they created the scene to fit around the music, and then we had the opportunity to go back and like write a new piece of music and re-record it. This was really fun to do. But we did record the violinist almost a full year before we recorded the rest of the orchestra. So it was a little unconventional in the way we produced it.
Yeah, so that violinist, Ray Chen, right, is his name?
Yes.
Yeah, so he's also modeled in the show. So you guys, that violinist actually is Ray Chen on the show. So it's pretty cool.
It is.
And talk about the choice of that violinist. Andre, were you involved in this discussion at all and kind of booking him as an artist, so to speak?
No, I actually was not. Christian, the showrunner, he's actually really good friends with Ray. And so he actually had the idea when he was, you know, writing the script and the scene, and so Ray fit the bill from inception, which is why he was able to be animated in it, because the runtime for that is so far ahead that we have to you know, ideate and then lock that in. And so in terms of picture lock, you know, they were able to consult Ray. He was super down for it. And then, mind you, he's doing it off of Stradivarius, by the way. And so, you know, it's just like, you know, very unconventional to just have somebody like that, because he really is into League as an IP and as the game. And so when that synergy is there, it was just very easy for it to happen.
I should also mention that Ray, well, this is the only time in the show that we actually see him. He's featured all over the soundtrack. Like pretty much anytime you hear a solo violin, it's Ray.
Sweet. And that second clip, obviously super dramatic, awesome. It was one of the highlights for me, you know, watching the series, that particular moment and that song by Woodkid, right? Yep. Yeah, it was incredible. I understand that you guys have a very unique way of working with songs on this show, and that you don't license them, you create them. So I would love to just kind of hear how that works.
Yeah, unique is a good way to describe it. Also terrifying. It was a really neat project for us because our lead, Christian, our director, he actually comes from music. He used to be the head of music at Riot, and so he made it a big deal from the very beginning that we're going to integrate songs in a pretty unconventional way. Instead of maybe just syncing a song and sort of having it float up there for a bit and then taking it away, he really wanted to write bespoke music every single sequence, and there's usually about one per episode in season 1, has a song crafted for it, almost like film score, which Sebastien and I were working on for a while, and it was tough, like, because score can function in a lot of ways that songs kind of don't, and a lot of Alex's score, it can take big moments like in his sequence that you saw, and then also it can hide away. And a song, as soon as that vocal starts, you kind of have this expectation that it's going to keep rolling. So when Seb and I were doing some early explorations, anytime we'd bring a vocal in, oh, here comes dialogue, we got to pull it back. It just felt so strange. And so every single sequence was this puzzle. And some of them were a little harder than others. This one had challenges in the beginning, but as soon as Jinx lights that flare, it's pretty sweet because it just kind of coasts for a while and we get some space to play. But some of them were tricky, and Seb did a lot of the action sequence ones that we tried to juggle an action sequence against sound effects. There's just so many bumps along the road, and I think about halfway through, we kind of invented our process that started working for us.
Nice. Well, why don't we just talk a little bit about your guys' role in the show and the game? Because I think you guys, obviously, you work both on League of Legends, the game, and Arcane, the show. And I think it would be great just to kind of get a baseline kind of what your role is and how you all work together. And why don't we start with Andre? Well, we'll start with you down there.
I have a very hybrid role. So we're all staff at Riot. And so, just not like project where we're consulting and then they come in and go away. We work there, that's our 9 to 5. And so League is our main IP, and the characters from Arcane are based off of League. My job, I do all the music deals at Riot, as well as just the operational stuff. And then the music supervisor is actually my second hat that I wear, because I come from the major label system. So I got my start at Universal at Republic, and then jumped over to Cobalt. And so I used to do A&R, and so by trade, I did the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack with some executives at Republic, and then Hunger Games, stuff like that. And so my discipline was there. And so that's how that's how they were able to coax me into music supervision. So I oversee, licensing, operations, and the music deals.
My name is Alex. I also have an artist project called Mako, and I met these guys here at Riot maybe about 8 years ago because something sort of fascinating was happening in the video game space, specifically with these guys, which is they started writing songs. They were always scoring these incredible animatics and cinematics that they'd post on YouTube, but then one thing led to another. They have this big esports event called Worlds every year, and they like to commission a pop song for it. And so I kind of was able to fit in with these guys who were already at Riot scoring full time and just pitch in by writing pop songs alongside them. And so we've probably, Seb and I specifically, probably worked on, 15 songs at this point. And by the time Arcane came to be, it was perfect because we kind of had all our bases covered, so we thought. And it was a great experience to be able to just hack away at Arcane and make a little bit of mayhem with it.
I'm Sebastien. I'm a staff composer at Riot. I've been there for about 8-9 years. Started at the same time as Alex. And I've been working on the music, both in the game, outside of the game, music videos, virtual bands, the songs, world songs that Alex mentioned. Kind of started right after Christian had started. He was the only person in the music team, so he brought me and Alex along, and we kind of saw the music of Riot kind of grow and getting more ambitious, started doing bigger and bigger songs, and then Arcane is kind of the culmination of all that.
Like Sebastien said, we started there about, I think it was 2014. And prior to that, we'd actually been working, we used to work at a company called Hollywood Scoring, which is sort of a music services company. And we had done contract work for Riot, and it got to the point where all of our contract work was for Riot and for League of Legends. So they're just like, all right, you should just go work there full time. The first couple of years we worked there, I think Riot was still sort of figuring out what they wanted to do. So the orchestral anthems, the anthems for Worlds, the big esports event, back then they were not songs. They were just sort of orchestral anthems, and that was one of the first things we worked on. But over the course of the last 8 years, prior to working on Arcane, we would just kind of, we were sort of like a nimble little team within Riot, where it's just like any team that needed music, they come to us, and sometimes it was in-game background music, but more often than not, it was sort of like a new character, a new champion would come out, and that new champion would need a theme, and that theme would mostly be heard outside of the game itself in cinematics and like a login screen as you're entering the game client. It was just sort of, it was fun because there was a ton of variety in spite of the fact that we were working at a game company where, you might look from the outside and think, oh, you're just gonna be writing like level music or background music the whole time.
I'm really curious about how you guys select these artists because I mentioned Woodkid before, and I know Lil Nas X recently worked with you guys, and Sting also is a part of Arcane. How does this artist selection process work, or do they come to you, or how does it all come together?
I'll probably start it creative and then punt it over to Andre because he has the tough job of getting those artists. But it'll usually all just be a creative process at first. We'll have a little sync with Christian, with our animators in Paris, just find out what do they want for this sequence. One thing that we use as well as all other shows is temp music. So they might put up a temp song. This one was actually quite different than what it turned out being. It was like The Day the Earth, so the Nine Inch Nails song. Yeah, it was badass, like this big epic thing, and then we ended up going in a string direction, but it'll usually get the ball rolling for us. And so the first process is just writing a scratch demo. For me, a lot of times it's like a piano reduction with some vocals, not full length, just like half a song. Make sure everybody's feeling good. We might tease it up against picture, make sure that feels good. And then at that point, we'll huddle together with our Riot Games music crew and just be like, all right, who do we want? Like what artist would fill this role perfectly? Arcane is so show focused. So for us, it's just what would feel the best up against picture. And then for this one specifically, Woodkid came at us pretty early. I mean, he was one of the most Arcane friendly artists out there for us. I think he actually went to school with the animators of Fortiche, like in Paris when he was in college. He's a wonderful filmmaker. He does these incredible music videos for other artists. He can work with picture. He did all this orchestra stuff here that I could have never done. He's just a wonderful person to be with. And then we say, hey, Andre, go find this guy for us and track it down.
Yeah, and so, after, Seaver, and I'm usually in the room as well when we're like ideating on who to find for that cue. And so every scene that you see in the series, every episode has its own bespoke music cue that we ideate from soup to nuts, create, figure out what the emotion, because it's supposed to carry the narrative onto the next scene, right? And so we have to make sure that the artists themselves can carry the weight of that through song. And so we then reach out to management, see if they're into it, see if they get the ecosystem, because it's very obtuse when you kind of say, hey, we're going to create a song that you're not going to own, but we want to take it and then put it on a soundtrack that is not through your label, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to go to the label, get their permission for the vocals, and then so in some instances, Seaver has wrote the majority of the song, and so then we have to do a co-publishing deal, which means that we share rights on the lyrics. So the lyrics and the sound often belong to two different people. And so we have to then negotiate that deal. And the sound side is usually represented by the record label, and then the publishing company represents the lyrics. And so we have to negotiate them in tandem with, with the episode as it's picture locking, and then deliver that to like iTunes and Spotify, and make sure that the runway is long enough to be able to do that. And so it's a lot of moving parts. In some instances, the deals are actually still going, and that's like the nature of the beast, simply because we have to then ascertain rights to then make sure that the rest of Riot Games can use it. So if they want to market the game, market the songs not in the episode, et cetera. And so all of those are matrix rights, which is why we like to own a lot of things and create it soup to nuts, because then a lot less cooks in the kitchen and a lot less red tape.
Is that why there's no licensed songs in Arcane?
Exactly why there's no licensed songs, with the exception of Enemy, which is our main title with Imagine Dragons. And the genesis behind that being a license is because we also wanted to lean into it from a global perspective. The band also wanted to lean into it that way. And so it just made sense for us to have a push and pull in terms of what rights we could ascertain. And so to be able to have it go super large and permeate on a global ecosystem, there's some things we had to give and take.
And obviously Imagine Dragons, they're in the series itself. They're
Correct.
animated into the show. So if you guys haven't seen it, it's pretty cool to see them in the show. Obviously that relationship must have been going on for a while. How are these relationships formed with these artists?
Yeah, in some instances, the artists themselves actually play League. So Imagine Dragons, they're really good friends of Christian, of the folks you see here on the stage. And even when they're on tour, we actually backstage built out a League the system for them to play while they're not playing on tour. that's how much they like League. When we see them, we actually go and play League and or Valorant at their house in Vegas, and so it's really super symbiotic for the most part. There's an affinity for League, and then in most instances, it's based off of the creative. If they get it, or they come on campus and they see the IP and what we're really invested into it, it's not something that is like cut and play and then you go about your business. It's we open the door and lift the veil for them to come back and do just peel the layers back and just really invest in it. And so I think from a creative process, these guys can speak to it more.
Well, I also just want to add regarding Imagine Dragons. This was a relationship that began many years ago. They were actually, I think they were the first time that we had a big artist perform the song at Worlds. This was back in 2014, and I think this song was both a huge success for Riot and for them. I think it really sort of the Worlds was in Korea that year, and I think it really expanded their market in that area in a way that they hadn't really gotten a foothold before. But yeah, it was just a very popular song, and I think it went very well for both sides. So they were happy to work with us again.
Nice. I want to know about the world building of the show built over Undercity, the musical world building specifically, obviously, and the use of this vinyl player that pops into the episodes, and kind of the decision-making process about that. This is a big question, obviously, because I want to know about the underscore of it all and the song placement of it all, of why music is such an important part of the show.
I think that the placement of the vinyl player is sometimes as they're working on the show, there are sort of established rules within our fantasy world of Runeterra of this exists within our fantasy world, this doesn't. Sometimes it's a bit of a gray area, and I think that we felt like we want to tell a really good story, and if we have to slightly stretch the rules to say, hey, yeah, we want to have a vinyl player, that means that somehow there's going to be recording technology in this world. They're sort of like, well, yeah, it's sort of a technological city. Maybe it's not exactly what we would consider, maybe it's not a real world vinyl player that we would imagine in terms of its sort of internal mechanics, but it seems like there ought to be a way within this pretty advanced society for some kind of recording technology to be there. So once we establish that, we're sort of like, okay, now that we say that there's recording, then we can say that maybe there's recordings of artists within this world that don't really sound like what you would expect to hear there, because people could have record collections and things like that. So I think it just opens up possibilities in terms of using music for storytelling in a very positive way.
There's a cool one with that Seb was working on in the first episode too, where we just needed a whole drum set of some kind, but not one that we would know on Earth. It was something that in Runeterra and Zon in this seedy underworld, what would their drums sound like? I don't know, Seb, if you want to talk a little bit about how you found that.
Yeah, so over the years, and because League of Legends has a lot of different regions to it, which have different personalities, characteristics, different types of people and characters that live there, and also different types of music. And so we always look into what would an instrument sound like from someone who lives in that particular place. And for Zon, in the first episode of Arcane, a lot of it's kind of an underground, kind of undercity atmosphere. It's kind of rusty. People are kind of making things DIY, and we kind of approach the music the same way, where some of the sound of the drums are kind of dirty trash cans and processed, distorted kind of percussion, various percussion, kind of all put together to kind of give you that sense that you're entering the world. So even though it's a song with a full song structure and vocals and lyrics, we still want it to feel like it fits with what you're seeing, especially at that moment where this is the first time you kind of see all of Zon as they go down an elevator. You want to be immersed while also enjoying a proper kind of song.
Is any other interesting instrumental palettes in the score, or anything that kind of was built for the show itself?
I don't know if we had anything that was built for the show itself, but I think that we were, sort of to his point, not just with drums, but a lot of the times we would sort of have this discussion about okay, well, we want something that's sort of grungy and guitarish, but we don't want it to sound like a guitarist sitting in a studio. So what can we do that carries that energy, but also sounds, more like what you'd expect to see within this world? And it doesn't always have to be super literal. I think sometimes you can be tempted to sort of overthink these things when you're like, wait a second, but this is a score moment. This is not a source music moment. It doesn't need to be something that you literally would find on the street within the world. But I think, just thinking about this helps sort of connect the two. So I think for For Piltover, it's very sort of fantasy orchestral, but it's Piltover because it's a very sort of scientifically forward-thinking society, almost to a fault. We wanted to make sure everything sort of had these really sort of small, precise patterns. So in addition to the normal orchestral palette, there'll be things like mechanical elements of clocks that have been sampled and then turned into sort of motor percussion that's just sort of like always ticking in the background. And then for Zahn, in addition to drums and stuff like that, many different just sort of found instrumental textures. Just like there was one cue where I think I just recorded the HVAC system across the street from me and then slowed it down and turned it into sort of like a percussion track. And then I noticed that within that track, my dog was barking, and that actually had this cool kind of like, sort of otherworldly howl to it once I pitched it down and distorted it and stuff like that. So that's in the track. But yeah, just sort of like finding palettes like that instead of just going to your typical presets.
Yeah. So how are the decision of making between score and song? Like what kind of spotting are you guys doing on these episodes? And how do you know when a song is going to drop and when it's going to be scored?
I think that's usually decided pretty early on. So while Christian is the sort of like the creative showrunner, he's not technically the director of these episodes. The directors are at Fortiche at the animation studio. And there's a huge amount of trust between them. So a lot of the times when Christian shares with them the script, like he wants them to take liberties of like, if you really feel like this moment is like should be a big song musical moment, like, let's see it in an animatic. Let's see where you can go with this. So I think there's a lot of discussion that happens early on just between Christian and the directors there, and sort of but they always, or at least they usually have a goal of having at least one of these moments per episode. But then usually, once they've found their song moment, unless there's a really compelling reason why they want to have a second moment in an episode, which we have a couple times, usually the assumption is like, okay, that's our moment. We might even treat it a bit like a music video, but then for the rest of the episode, it's going to be more typical in terms of the structure.
Yeah, I noticed that the songs land at the end of the episodes mostly.
Like Alex was saying, there was sort of like a varied function of these songs, and every once in a while, Fortiche would almost make like this music video vignette out of it that is just super rad, but it's sort of stalled in time. Whereas other times the sequence is like narrative. Sometimes the lyrics kind of needed to be represented by the characters themselves. Sometimes Christian wanted it to be this like omniscient character that's just sort of talking about the world. But a lot of that stuff came at us. I think we kind of decided, let's do all these songs like halfway through. So unlike other shows where we could have written songs first and then feed them over to them and then they kind of thread it all together, we were just looking at these, in progress animatics from Fortiche, which was great because it told us a lot about what the song ought to be. But it was really tough because now we have to plug a song into this sort of moving machine as you got a new render back and the timing's moved a little bit, which is okay when you're scoring a thing, and it's bad when you got Sting's vocal right there and you're like, oh shit, I don't know what to do here. So there's just part of the process that we're hopefully trying to figure out a little better for second season.
But from a mechanical standpoint, I think from inception, we had confirmed and knew that there was going to be a soundtrack to accompany the series, simply because Riot is also known for its music. We call them cinematics, and just our songs and our orchestral scores as well. And so if you like in the script itself, there's just a block saying music moment, and it's supposed to push the narrative forward. It's not an afterthought. It was something that we went into knowing that it was going to be a key component to the series, as opposed to a traditional series where they just get a budget and they got to go shoehorn songs. Traditionally, no, it's every song is created specifically for that episode, for that scene, and for that character and for that arc. And so that's why they're so married together, is because there's without the episode, those songs wouldn't have come to be all together.
Can you guys talk about the dynamic of working on League of Legends versus Arcane, how it's different, and were you guys working on the game and the show at the same time?
I guess I can start. So for the most part, I was not working on them at the same time. But there was, a few years back, we did a pilot for Arcane, and that was before I sort of was working on Arcane as my primary role. But yeah, so it was sort of like I'd work on the pilot a bit and then, work on another project for League. I think the biggest difference to me is that with League, even though everything you're working on is for League of Legends. They feel like much more sort of time-boxed individual projects that don't really have a whole lot of relationship to the next thing you're going to work on. So, for example, I might 1 month be working on a theme for this champion who's like her name's Aurelia. She's a blade dancer. She sort of dashes all over the map, and the music kind of captures that. And then the next month, they want to do like a arcade-themed reskin of the main map. So it's sort of all 8-bit sounds and things like that. And then after that, it might be some sort of promo for the game. So it's just kind of like you're sort of moving from one thing to the next. And a lot of that, at least back then, was sort of determined by, okay, who has the bandwidth to work on this, and which composer does it really appeal to? We had, I think, 4 or 5 composers back then. So usually there was a way of really matching, like, this composer seems like a good fit in terms of sort of like what style is their wheelhouse, and also like who's available to work on things. But I think that moving over to Arcane was very exciting to me, because it's sort of like, now I finally get to work on something where I can really sort of sustain ideas and not think of things as sort of individual pieces, but think of things in terms of how they all fit together, and sort of continue to build on previous things instead of having to kind of reinvent the wheel each time, which is sometimes how it felt like when you're working on champion themes, because it's like each theme needs to be its own separate musical universe it might share a musical palette with other things, but it's not going to share melodies or anything like that.
And something else that's cool too, because we have more composers that work for the game specifically, and we all hear each other's music, so we know what we're working on. So as Arcane's as the music's being made, the rest of the team is hearing what we're doing for Zon or Piltover, and they're incorporating some of that into their own music for characters, and that might be from that area, and vice versa. So we all kind of keep each other aligned. Like we know, what the sound of League of Legends is supposed to be, and so there's a lot of back and forth still, sharing of knowledge and inspiration.
From a business standpoint, music is both a product and a service at Riot. And so at Arcane, for example, the soundtrack is a product. And then if we work with League, the esports, and they want to build a world's anthem, that's a service. And so creatively driven, it's like an agency in that instance. So when the League team comes and says, hey, we want an anthem for 2017, 2018, 2019, like Alex was saying, it's very iterative, and they're boxed because it's a service. But when we're driving like our virtual artists, so KDA, True Damage, or the soundtrack, for example, that is a product that has campaigns, marketing plans, it's sustained engagement. And so we have to look at it through 2 different lenses, because we're doing 2 different things throughout the organization.
And I would say one of the interesting things about working with these guys and then putting this music out through League of Legends for so many years is that I feel like we're interacting pretty regularly with, like, what is our players' expectation of what the music ought to be, where are places that we can try some new stuff. And every single release kind of feels like we've either like everybody's pissed at us, everybody's super excited, and then we reorient based on that. And it's really fun space, because for the longest time, nobody expected a video game company to be putting out records. And that was just the coolest thing ever, because the player base is huge, they're super passionate, and like these guys work so hard on everything. So it's very sincerely made. So these players are getting these songs that are like, somebody worked really hard on this, and it matches the cinematic, and it's super badass. And then now there's this interesting phenomenon of, okay, every year they expect the big world's anthem. We've got this show now that just came out of nowhere, and now we got to do it again. And it's a really interesting experience to just kind of like, okay, what made this fun in the first place? Why did we make this? And then what is this now that the whole community expects it?
I noticed, obviously, that there are characters from League in Arcane. Do characters from Arcane appear in League? Does it work backwards?
That's a good question. So I think one of the things that's kind of fascinating about the development for League and the development for Arcane is that League development occurs on a shorter timeline. So for example, I remember when we were working on Arcane, someone approached me with a meeting they're like, hey, we have this idea for this character. She's a performer. She's from Zon. Her name is Seraphine. Is there any way of working her into Arcane? And even though we were still working on season 1, we were like all the scripts have already been written. Like this, maybe we had this conversation 2 years ago, but 2 years ago, Seraphine wasn't even a concept on a cocktail napkin yet. So it's sort of like it's a little tricky. But I would say, we've already seen cases of, for example, Silco. He's like sort of the main villain of season 1, and I think he's in TFT. Yeah, I know that we made little promos for that, and I would expect, we might see some more. But
Very cool.
I would say at its core, so League of Legends is our core IP, right? And so we have a world called Runeterra, and all of the champions from League are from Runeterra, and Arcane. The genesis of Arcane, the storyline between Vi and Jinx, those are 2 champions from League, and so there's an inherent symbiosis there where they come from. However, not all of there's not some characters from Arcane may not be in League, for example, because the universes themselves may be a little different from a canon standpoint, right? And so for us, in terms of a narratively driven world for Arcane, is to push the Arcane storyline. But in League, you might have Jinx that is, her storyline changes based on her skin, for example, in some instances, right? So she might be Christmas themed or robot themed or, just her regular theme, but those have stories that come with them, and it's managed by our lore team, and they manage the canon behind each champion.
And musically speaking, does the music pull over in the sense of, do you write a theme for Jinx, and does her theme then appear in Arcane or anything like that?
Yeah,
I would say it varies. There are some of the characters from Arcane that the character came out a very long time ago, and sometimes Christian would just be like, hey, like, don't use that theme from like 2012. Like, just do something better. But in other cases, like, for example, Jinx, she does have a theme within the show that's sort of loosely based on this song, Get Jinxed. And actually, her song makes an appearance. Like, she's listening to it in one scene in episode 4. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of a case-by-case basis. I think it sort of depends on the strength of the original theme for the character, and then how the character is presented in the show, I think. But certainly in cases where we have created a theme for the character in the show, and if that character didn't already have a theme in League, we would try to sort of retroactively expand it back that way. Sort of for Caitlyn, she didn't have a theme before. I composed one that was sort of used here and there in the show in a pretty subtle way. But then we recently relaunched Caitlyn with a sort of visual update about the time that Arcane came out, and we also sort of published the theme, the suite version of her theme, as we heard in the show, as her new updated theme for the game.
Very cool. I'm going to turn it over to the audience for some questions in a little bit. I just have one more for you guys, so you can start ruminating and think about what you want to ask. But I want to know about you mentioned additional composers on your team, and obviously working with artists. I'm curious what your discovery tools are. How are you finding composers to work with, and how are you finding artists to work with?
We have a really cool, these guys have more Slack channels than I do, but we have a great one rolling that I'm privy to that's just music sharing. And I think that's, all of Riot Games Music is our sort of like sub music company. And everybody's just huge music fans. So we're all just throwing stuff around. And then, working with music supervisors now and getting sort of like a little bit of extra help on, we need a cool voice that sounds like this and does this, and having some help with that has been really nice. But, there's probably like 15 of us in our little peanut gallery that we're all putting our heads together. We have weekly syncs, and okay, we got these demos. How's the artist reach out going? That artist disappeared on us. Who else do we like? And sometimes we get stumped and we got to kind of go back to the well, make some Spotify playlists, just get things going. But yeah, we got a pretty good setup for just like sharing as much as possible.
Yeah, and I would say on the composer side, it's actually, sometimes if we have a composer position open up, we will, people might have recommendations, but we'll literally just post it on our Riot Games careers webpage, and then we'll get, 800 applications for the one position.
I mean, it's the same for the so the composition side, and then the front line. So the lyrically driven music, they're usually governed by creatively governed by two different departments within Riot. And so when we're looking for like featured artists to work with for our frontline songs, it's the same process. But again, the creative usually drives our search, and so it always begins with us meeting with a creative director or somebody who is behind the responsible for how it's supposed to look, feel, the taste, and texture. And then for us, it's just brainstorming, looking at top playlists, looking at deep diving, link surfing, all that stuff. But usually we like to start with developing artists and independent artists mostly. Simply, it's a lot less red tape, but also I think they feel a lot more invested and hungry simply because they have nothing to lose also. And so for us, I think that also opens up their minds creatively into creating something good.
Alex Seaver, how much French horn did you get into the show?
All right, the backstory is that I used to play French horn. I crashed and burned at it. And then I found these guys and they rescued me. And Christian ever since has been giving me shit about pulling out the French horn for the soundtrack, which I think I did on one cue that might have then get shoved down in the fader. So I think we're still kind of at a net zero on the French horn.
Well,
but
season 2.
Season 2.
Anybody out in the audience have any questions? We'll start with you right here.
My name is Jeremiah Moss, and thank you so much for sharing your work and doing a very great job with the soundtrack. And Mr. Poland, you're doing a really good job at moderating. I thought my question was going to get answered before I could shoot my shot. You talked about character themes, and I host a podcast where I talk about music and film and how it represents characters or themes and stories. One song that really stood out to me was Misfit Toys and how it represented a certain character, Echo. So I would like for y'all to explain the overall inspiration of the production and composition of the track. And I was planning on making a podcast episode solely for this character. And with your permission, and yes or no, I would like to paraphrase your answers on this episode.
Wait, before you answer, I want to know what the podcast is called.
The Playlist Shuffle podcast is on
All right.
Spotify.
All right.
I think Sebastien, you did that one, right?
Yeah, Alex and I, so kind of Fortige had a really good kind of concept of how the episode was going to start with the visuals, and they had a different song on there. And then a lot of it was kind of knowing who Echo is and kind of looking at the visuals and all the kind of the movement that they had happening, getting inspired by that, and then kind of trying to make a kind of at first it came from making a cool beat, something that would feel good and appropriate for what we're seeing on the screen. Same thing as I mentioned earlier, the types of sounds, thinking of how to process them so that it kind of feels like it could be something that's related to Zon, a part of that world. And because it's more of a music video type visual, it kind of gives us a little bit more leeway into leaning more into a standalone song as opposed to kind of a score. So really, following the same kind of process of figuring out the sounds and what kind of energy and aggression the instrumental needs, and also, you wrote the chorus.
Yeah, I mean, we had a nice cheat mode on there, which is that Seb made this awesome beat, and then we sent it to Pusha T, and then Pusha just wrote the whole thing and sent it back, and it was perfect. Like, we were so in love with it, and we couldn't believe. A lot of times on the show, it's like, I can't believe we're hearing Pusha T just wrote something for us right now. That we needed a little bit of a chorus, just a little melodic chorus, and so Christian asked me to sing one, and it was just like, you want me to sing on a Pusha T song? This is ridiculous. There's no way he's gonna like this. And it was nice because we didn't have to be terrified in front of him. We could do it from afar. But him or his people said it was cool. And then we got to meet him finally during the premiere, and we performed it together. And I blacked out the whole time. I couldn't believe I was on stage with him. But especially that whole episode, because the next song Seb did is with, Denzel Curry, Jizzle, and Brent Joy as well. Same kind of thing where we just sent out a track and they just took care of it from there, which is pretty nice.
I would say though, so it's because Pusha is we worked with him previously as well, and they're good friends from a management side, and so when I was just like, why don't we just do Pusha T? And I just threw it out there, yeah. And so then Seaver was like, we sent it back when he did the hook, And he was like, do you think they're gonna mind? Like, is he gonna be upset? And I was like, dude, just like send it back and tweak it a little bit. And so he sent it back. He's very polite, just sends it back, a full ref. And then, like he said, when at the premiere, when he's there, I was like, do you want to take a picture? He was like, should I? I was like, go, you're on the song. Like, and so, I think that's how humble these guys are. And so, but like, if it's my job to then, facilitate all of that for them. And so, I'm glad that it could work out.
Also, the other cool thing with that scene is that it's hard for Fortiche to adjust their animation once it's rendered and everything. But for some scenes, they were able to kind of change the edit a little bit to really fit the music. So they're really cognizant of doing what they can to make it fit. There was another episode later on where one of the difficulties with full proper songs is the chorus has to happen at a certain time usually, and it just wasn't happening with the shot. So they were actually able to, we asked them, could you remove some frames here and there just to make it fit? And they did it, which was awesome. So that's something that, we hope to have more of that in season 2.
And something I just want to add, Sebastien also wrote the theme for Echo when he first came out for League. So he'd already, sort of lived and breathed Echo back in 2016, 2015, whenever that was.
15.
So this is sort of like a nice chance for him to go back and revisit the character.
Yeah, the caveat is, so these guys, for the majority of the champions and all of that stuff, the staff composers at Riot are the ones that write the compose the score and then perform it themselves with the instruments. And so, from between these three guys, you're seeing a good chunk of the creative behind it.
Got a few more questions. I'll get you, sir, in the hoodie. I think you're wearing a hoodie. Yes, or yes, that person.
All right, so my question is kind of long-winded, but as you guys said, obviously back when League started doing this original music for a video game company, that was like kind of revolutionary and a very new idea. And since then, you've had some incredible artists featured on this music, Mako obviously being included, but many others as well. So I'm just really curious to hear, what were the conversations like back in the earlier stages of this endeavor when going to artists with this idea? And how is that involved like through to now with League and Arcane? And do you have artists now who come to you wanting to do this?
That's a really good question. And that's probably the biggest difference between season 1 and season 2, which is season 1, we had to reach out to these people and we swear this is going to be cool. This isn't going to be stupid. Yes, this is a video game company. We're trying to do a television show. Please, Mr. Sting, will you join us for this thing? And I still can't believe the artists we got for it. I mean, Andre hooked us up and we had our whole team was just working. And it's a full-on process. The life of any one of these songs, it feels like it takes forever to kind of go through the demo phase and find the artists, record them, get the vocals sounding good, bring it back. But season 2 has been really nice because people, they reach out and they know it, we're doing artist calls all the time right now and people will come with their hair dyed blue. Like, you don't understand, like, I am Jinx, and it's just the coolest freaking thing ever. And it speaks to the writing of the show that everyone did and the animation of the show that Fortiche did. I mean, the characters feel so real to us, and the fact that they feel even close to that to anybody else is unbelievable. And so I think just witnessing the process, season 1 to season 2, has been a real treat so far.
And there was another question back there. Yep, go ahead.
So I think the best way to phrase this is when you guys talk about all this stuff and all the conversations that happen early on and the creativity and all the different ways it can go because everything's in-house and you're looking to own from the beginning, how do you approach, especially coming from the label side and understanding how fickle that can be and the red tape that you mentioned, especially as the artists get bigger and things are living longer? How do you set that balance between allowing them the freedom to play and create and stay on that cutting edge versus being efficient in terms of missing those kind of roadblocks and obstacles that as coming from the label side you're gonna hit?
It's a very good question. That's why I'm bald. I think it's a push and a pull, and it's a give and take, right? I think as we evolve, the company itself understands that the bigger the artists are that we work with, there's going to be a lot more leverage that they bring to the table. But then at the same time, when we look across the organization, we try to see what rights do we actually need to then see, because how are you going to use the song in your product, in your platform, whatever, right? And then in some instances, we look at that on paper, and then we go to the artist and or their label, and it's just a negotiation. Sometimes to be efficient, we have to give, and in some instances, there's a line in the sand at the bare minimum of what we actually need. And every negotiation is different at the end of the day. And so to answer the question, it depends on the caliber. There are a lot of factors, who's in the negotiation room. So you usually have your artist, their label, that's one. Then the writer, their publishing company, that's another. And then usually they don't like each other in some instances. And so we're in the middle of that sort of maelstrom and trying to figure out what is the optimal solution for everyone here. And ultimately, that's what we try to walk out of the negotiation room with. I hope that answers this question.
Any other questions out in the audience? All right, you, sir, over here.
Ross, good to see you.
Your Mako project as a duo, and that was after a couple years out of school, right? How do you think you would speak to college Alex and what you were thinking about what your career would look like, then, as a guy who wanted to go into a artist project, now ended up with this massive team behind you working on everything you're doing now?
I mean, that's a great question. Great to see you again, Ross. It's been years. It's one of those things that, like, I think we're all trying to figure out in our careers too, is like, I know I want to get somewhere over here and it seems super competitive and crazy to get there. So how the hell do I do it? And there's no master plan here. Like, I literally just walked into whatever seemed fun. So I graduated as a French horn player. That didn't end well. And then my buddies took me to Electric Daisy Carnival and showed me dance music for the first time. And I just thought, well, that's not what that was. And I didn't have a good time there. So maybe I'll have a fun time over here. And along the way, you just pick up all these weird trade skills. Like I, learned how to write songs. I started learning how to produce pop music, electronic music. I was trying to get back into film scoring this whole time. So I glommed onto these guys as soon as I found them. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you kind of can do a bunch of random things, and that makes you interesting to the workforce because you can pitch in certain places. And then with something like Arcane, it kind of makes it fun because you're like, oh, we can borrow all these things that I learned and incorporate them into this show. And it's just blind luck that I met Christian, and they were making this amazing show that would have been amazing without me, that I got to just jump upstream with them and do it. And now it's become this thing where it's like, oh man, I love that so much. I love what we just did. Are there more things out there that are like that, where you can sort of combine all these things? But yeah, I would have told him to quit the French horn and just have fun. I mean, really, it's just about go find what you love, and then it'll happen from there.
Any other questions from the audience? Awesome. All right. Well, we got one more. Yes, you again, please.
Quick random thought to end on. As someone who has never played League of Legends once, is Arcane hard to follow? Because now I'm pretty compelled to watch it.
I can answer that.
I can answer that one too.
I mean, I'm just saying because I was asked to moderate this panel, I'd never played the game or watched the show. And so I was like, well, I better do both so I know what I'm talking about. And so I just jumped into the show right away, and I'd never played the game, and I thought the show was fantastic. And now I want to play the game. It actually sells me on the game.
That's the goal.
I will say anecdotally, I've heard lots of stories from people who watch the show without any experience of League, and they're like, "Oh, this is amazing. Let me go play the game." And then they play the game, and they're like, "Oh my God, why did I do this? This is really hardcore." And the people are not always very nice.
Yeah, but I do think to that point, Arcane is supposed to be an entry point into our universe, as well as the music is supposed to be a vehicle for that as well. So if you go on Spotify, for example, and just tune in on the soundtrack, or wherever DSP, wherever you listen to the music, if you like it, you can then go explore our universe that way. If you can read the lore, you can read behind the characters. It's not supposed to be prescriptive or in any way like that. And so we're supposed to offer different entry points for you to then enjoy and experience our IP in the way that you see fit. And so to that end, Arcane is just another example of that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you so much, panelists.
Thanks,
Great.
Chandler.
Yeah.
This is so
thanks,
fun.
you guys.
Thanks.
All right. We're done.